welcome and thank you for joining us today. As I said before, if you'd like to introduce yourselves in the chat, let us know where you work and where you're based, and we can get started. So this is the 10th webinar in our data-centric AI series. And in this special edition, in collaboration with Nortal, we'll be discussing the crucially important topic of local authorities, data and AI. But before we start, I'm Joe Massey, a senior researcher here at the ODI. I've done lots of work thinking about how organizations can steward data on behalf of the public, and I'll be the panel chair for today. I'm going to introduce the panelists in a little bit, but first we'll start off with a bit of housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded, and it will be shared via social media as well as on our email newsletter. It's also going to be archived on the ODI website and YouTube page. We may use some quotes and extracts from the recording in future ODI communications. So yeah, if you have to drop off, you'll be able to watch the rest of the webinar at a later date. We really encourage you to submit your own questions for the panel discussion. And if you'd like to do so, please feel free to use the Q&A functionality on the Zoom webinar. Neil's already introduced himself in the chat, but if there's anything else you need, please feel free to drop any questions or thoughts in the chat function as well. So this is the 10th webinar in our data-centric AI series, a program where we share our work and research at the ODI and invite experts from around the world to share key insights and recommendations for building the socio-technical data infrastructure needed to make AI work for everyone. You can find the recordings of each of our previous webinars with experts from tech companies, academia, the public sector and beyond on our YouTube channel. You can scan the QR code there in the top right if you're interested in watching those today. And as I mentioned, today's recording will be made available in a couple of weeks once we've added closed captions to the recording. So I've introduced myself, but who else is joining me today on the panel? First of all, we're grateful to be joined by Martina Bouwman, the Head of Data for London at the Greater London Authority. As Head of Data for London, Martina is realising the Mayor of London's vision to make it simpler for people to share and use data held across London to improve the city and benefit Londoners. Previously, she was a government data scientist and statistician at Number 10, the Department for Health and Social Care and the Ministry of Justice, and has done work internationally in Rwanda and Nepal. Great to have you here today, Martina. Next, Privat Livak, a chief architect at Nortal. So Nortal is an Estonian strategic digital transformation partner for both the private and public sectors, working across the world to deliver digital solutions, especially in and around GovTech. So it's probably no secret to most people on this webinar today that Estonia is a world leader when it comes to digital government, and Preet has over 15 years of experience helping the country to get that point. He served as an advisor to the Estonian government's architectural board and contributed to the design and development of several core systems enabling real-time data exchange and fully online public services. Internationally, he serves on the global e-government and interoperability working groups and has advised governments in North America, the Middle East, and Africa on building secure, citizen-centric digital states. Preet, great to have you joining us today. And last but not least, we're joined by our very own Professor Eleanor Simpel, the Director of Research at the ODI, and the recently appointed co-director of the Artificial Intelligence Institute at King's College London. Over the past 2 decades, Eleanor has led research on human-centric AI, advocating for democratization of AI's benefits by design. She also features in the Women in AI 2000 ranking. Eleanor, pleasure to have you join us today. So, as I mentioned, today's webinar is delivered in partnership with Nortal. Over the next few months, we're working together to explore AI readiness of data practices in local government across the UK, using our recently published framework for AI-ready data as a starting point. In practice, that's going to involve a lot of outreach, speaking to local authorities up and down the country, not only to measure their data's AI readiness, but also to understand the unique constraints being faced by councils as tech innovation continues to accelerate. If you're working at a local authority in the UK and would like to hear more about this work or contribute to our research, send us an email, reach out via social media, and really get in touch because we'd love to speak with you about this work. But with no further ado, let's get started with the panel. So I wanted to start off discussing a little bit about the landscape of local authority data that we see around us today. And so I thought, Eleanor, we'd start with you. I want to kind of put the question to you. How do you think that landscape of local authority data has changed over time, thinking not only about the quality, but also how open we are about sharing data at a local authority level?
Yes, I think, we start with the academic. Um, I'm sure my colleagues will have much more practical and up-to-date insights. But from what I've seen in the last years, also one of the roles I had the privilege to play since 2014 was to advise the European Commission in building dataeuropa.eu. So this is a portal that brings together um, over 80 repositories, more than 1 million data sets, and they're published openly in order for anyone in Europe, and that includes the UK and 30 something other countries, to be able to find data from different domains at different levels of granularity with ease. So based on that experience, as well as the work that I've been doing at the ODI, I think we've seen some progress. At the same time, I think we're also in a fairly unique moment in time where there seems to be in some parts of government and beyond a feeling that open data specifically is a solved problem. And we have done it, and we have these data sets, and we have seen some uptake for some of them, and that's it. That's the end of the journey. There's still lots of questions around unlocking data that was never made public. There's questions around improving how data is shared, if that data is too sensitive to be made more widely available. And there's also a trend to start thinking about the value of data in unproductive ways that lead perhaps to some decisions around stopping some of these efforts that have created a lot of economic growth and innovation.
Absolutely. And I started with you to get that overview level. So now I'll
I
hand over
hope
to
I've provided that. I haven't even spoken
absolutely.
about AI, but
Well,
yes.
don't worry, we're
Yeah.
coming to AI. Everyone's waiting for that topic. But I wanted to come next to Martina. You've done lots of amazing work already in London. Could you share a bit more about your experiences and how much of what Eleanor's mentioned around the kind of landscape chimes with your experience in London?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So part of what I do is I run the London Data Store, which is kind of our open data portal, which we remain committed to keeping up to date. But I do recognize some of what Eleanor is saying is that some of the data sets that were published during kind of the peak of the open data spirit, we're finding it more and more difficult to maintain the resourcing that's required to prepare really good open data. It just requires a lot of continuous work by public services that are increasingly stretched and public services that struggle to see directly the value being generated, because often the value from open data doesn't come back to the local authority. That doesn't mean it's not important, but it means that it's very difficult to make it match with the bottom line. And so we maintain lots of data sets and continue to maintain lots of data sets, but maybe some of the people attending today have sent us an email going, when is this being updated next? And we've had to disappoint some people because we're not updating it continuously. That said, we are, as we think towards the future and kind of where we're going next, what we're therefore starting to do is pivot towards curated data that is really more targeted at specific places we want to have an impact. So much more thematically targeted. Here are the data sets we think are important. And they're not always open data sets. So sometimes a subset of that is open already or can be opened. but actually we're starting to look towards infrastructure that's able to combine that open culture with the extra pieces of data that are necessary to create kind of frontline impacts. And then I think about things like I'm trying to come up with example. I think rough sleeping might be a really good example where, for example, the top level data absolutely should be public. It's really important to have sort of transparency and accountability on how we are serving really vulnerable people. But at the same time, it's not appropriate to tell you where this one individual is sleeping tonight, which is important for operational purposes. So bringing that data together and making data discoverable not only when it's open, but also when it can only be privately shared, and enabling partnerships to be set up even when it can't just be Googled. That's the kind of infrastructure we're now starting to think about, because that's where we see value that we are able to continue investing in and kind of make that case for data work still.
Absolutely. That fascinating insight. And we're lucky to be joined by Preet today, joining from Estonia. So it would be fantastic to hear a little bit more about whether, obviously we hear a lot about Estonian government data, but we're really interested to hear whether kind of the local data scene in Estonia kind of mirrors some of these challenges that we're facing here in the UK.
So hello from my side as well. It definitely does mirror the challenges you're facing, as local governments are often struggling with lack of resources in terms of financial and human capital. They need to operate in a much narrower space in terms of restrictions. And when we think about open data initiatives, then this is not their priority oftentimes, because, as you said, this is something that oftentimes doesn't come back to the local governments, or doesn't create value for them. But furthermore, I think the private data, or not open data that was mentioned before, is something that should be actually managed and maintained with the same quality requirements as the open data is. We see there's a lot of attention on the open data initiatives around the world, and this obviously has a public-facing interface. But because of that, sometimes the data that's maintained within the government agencies is neglected. It is collected, but the purpose of it and the quality of it is not maintained at the same level. So it's not maintained as a product, such as open data sometimes is.
Absolutely. Thanks, Preet. And so, as we've already touched on already, AI has become a really kind of topic of interest for practically everyone, I think, these days, and certainly everyone on this webinar today. So there's obviously a significant benefits to be had from AI systems and working in local government. But something that's come up a lot in our work here at the Open Data Institute is trying to understand what it actually means for data to be AI ready. So Eleanor, I wanted to ask you, what do you think AI ready local government data actually looks like in practice? Big question.
Another practical question. So just to state a few principles. So we've been doing some work, some thinking at the ODI to unpack this term that lots of people have been using. And that started actually by creating a taxonomy of AI data. And the reason for that was because each of these different species of data from the taxonomy have slightly different properties. Their life cycle is different. The way we assess their quality or availability, or we think about terms of use and sharing is different. I'm going to give you some examples. So there's data that is used in pre-training of foundational models, which maybe lots of people have heard about. There is much smaller focused data, possibly curated data that is used to fine-tune, so to tailor a model to a specific type of behavior and optimize towards certain types of performance metrics. Then on top of that, there's benchmark data sets that have been used by the foundation model providers. to determine whether their performance is good enough and meets that state of the art. There are reference data sets that are used, I don't know, a list of countries, for example, or a dictionary of terms, of toxicities terms that someone may use to safeguard a model to improve its behavior. So all these resources play a certain role in data-centric AI. Now, if we're thinking about a data holder, for instance, a local authority, there will be a difference for sure in a use case where that local authority is building say, the local authority Humphrey chatbot, versus whether that local authority wants to share that data with AI developers, maybe with suppliers, to realize a certain AI opportunity. Across these different use cases, readiness will mean slightly different things. I think the framework we have published a few weeks ago, a framework, an AI readiness framework for datasets. And for us, the most important thing there was to advance our collective thinking around the question of what does a publisher of data have to consider if they are running a data catalog or a data platform to make it easier for a developer to use that data. And to some degree, that resonates with some of the conversations in data management from back in the day about what format do you want to publish data openly or share it widely without actually knowing the use case. Say without knowing the types of queries that someone would want to answer on that data and so on. And it also resonates to architectures like FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. So those sort of general purpose principles. But at the same time, with the framework, we wanted to acknowledge that getting the data to a stage where it can be ingested in a model for pre-training, for fine-tuning, takes a lot of work, and it tends to be slightly different type of work than perhaps a data engineer would be used to, or a data scientist would be used to. And we've spelled out, working with various experts and drawing from a number of projects, 3 pillars for readiness, which we try to make as actionable as possible. But of course, what we didn't do and what we're going to do next is looking at specific types of data modalities or formats, and domains, to make those recommendations even more useful for those use cases.
Thanks, Eleanor. And hopefully the ODI team has shared a link to that piece of work in the chat, so that anyone who's interested can find out a bit more about what it means for data to be AI ready. But I wanted to come to Preet next. And you've worked in Estonia, in the UK, and more broadly around the world. What are the kind of real success stories and examples of where kind of AI ready data has worked, and you've been involved with projects that have kind of realized the value of data using AI?
Yeah, I think there's a real value in understanding that we need to maintain our data as a product at all times, and it's very difficult to create AI readiness for the data if it's raw, unfiltered, low quality data. So it makes sense to start there to ensure that there's a high quality data set that we can work on, and then it comes up with what sort of AI solution do we want to put on top of that, and that should be driven by the business challenge that either local government or central government wants to solve. So I don't think we should use AI for the sake of using AI or making the data AI ready if there isn't actual use case to make it AI ready. But other than that, if there is an actual use case or business case behind it, then it's very sometimes it's a very tailored process of making the data AI ready, considering the specific needs of the individual use case. And what have been the past great examples? Estonia used already, or 10 years ago, Estonia implemented a solution that helps unemployment insurance fund to predict long-term unemployment for individuals, and then provide additional assistance for these individuals if they have high risk of being long-term unemployed. And that solution didn't use any fancy AI like we're used to right now with large language models and such. It used very traditional machine learning models to do that based on the data that was already present for the unemployment insurance fund. So I think this case illustrates well that you don't need the fanciest tech to do these things. You just need a really good business case that actually creates value for both the customer and the end user of those systems, so that we're not just building AI readiness or AI solutions for the sake of building those solutions, but rather creating value, and that can be measured by customers and end users alike.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I wanted to kind of come next to Martina, and thinking from your kind of day-to-day experience, you already talked about maybe some of the challenges around resources. And we wanted to kind of, from your view on the ground, what's in the way of you reaching AI ready data? What are the hurdles that we need to get over from a local authority perspective?
Well, I mean, it's probably worth mentioning that the AI readiness isn't only about open data, I suppose. All of these sort of private sharing projects require quite a lot of these same things. I mean, it's just that de facto, currently, we share a lot of them verbally in various meetings, and actually be better if the catalogue was just complete. And so what Data for London is trying to do, and we're in a few weeks' time for London Data Week, we're releasing the Data for London Library, which is all about metadata. It's all about sharing that information about data sets so that people can find the data that they're after. It's also actually encouraging people to improve their metadata, because essentially we will release it with not loads of data sets in, and we've had to set the bar quite low, because a lot of local authorities they've invested maybe in their open data metadata because they know that that's important, but they've basically never invested in their internal metadata. There are more and more organizations now where their internal catalogs are starting to look really good. And so we want to show what the world can look like if you start telling people what you have, even if you can't publish the data set underneath. So the Data for London Library is going to allow you to search city data all in one place, even if you can't have the file right there and then. And what that allows you to do is shortcut a problem that we see quite a lot in local authorities, because everything we do, basically everything we do with partners. And there are usually delivery partners, frontline organizations, the voluntary sector is involved. We have sort of contracted services out with commercial partners. So a lot of the administrative data sets that you need to do the kinds of predictive things that we want to do are held by other people. And often it takes years to find the people. At a city as big as London, it's often 6 different companies running the same service for a different patch. And so those 6 need to all talk to each other. So practically what we see is the absolute best use cases where we're seeing real impact are either run by individual boroughs or by organizations like TfL or the police, where they've got that kind of London scope. So that's examples like driving around and finding all your advertising billboards, which is a useful data point to have, because the business case is we want to detect advertising that wasn't licensed, right? People putting up posters without having permission to. We see that TfL is doing a lot of interesting work in its road lab to predict air quality impacts of roadworks, right? And can we do that in a smarter way so that we don't affect air quality? And of course, the Met Police is doing facial recognition trials on the streets. And all of these things, we've already had some excellent questions about some of the drawbacks of this. But the practical kind of reason we're doing these and not others is because it's really hard to stitch data together. And so both discovering it, which is the first bit of the program we're focusing on, the next bit will be about standardizing it, thinking about how do we make sure that when they talk about a billboard, they may mean the same thing as when the next borough talks about a billboard. And to find the right partners. Where does this data exist and who should be part of this data sharing project? Because we're now talking about AI readiness, not only in the era of open data where you can find your own, but where you're relying on partners to open things up for you.
And I'd actually like to add one more thought to the discussion here. I think it's really crucial to focus on metadata, and not only metadata around data, but also metadata around services that exchange data. So this is something that's often neglected, but if we think about development partner, how they explore the environment they're entering, either local or central government environments, they often rely on documentation, and that can be considered somewhat metadata as well. And they're relying on the existing services that are already present there, and all the metadata around the data that's also hopefully published and created as taxonomies. And now when we're thinking about the AI-enabled engineering tools, then all of this metadata is fed into those tools to make sense of the environment that we are operating in. And if the documentation has a lot of technical depth in it, or is it lacking, and the services like the API documentation don't have sufficient description, then this is not. It requires additional investment on both sides to actually make sense of the environment. So the better we're at in terms of the metadata quality for data and also for the services that exchange this data, the more we can automate and rely on the AI tools to assist us in moving faster in building new services on top of that.
Eleanor, did you have? I have a feeling
I
you
have
might
a few
have some
things to add.
comments on this. Go ahead.
Say, very much agree with colleagues on the panel. I am an ontology engineer by training, so that was all my youth was spent on that for what it's worth. But actually, going back to the world of AI in which we live in today, that topic of metadata remains extremely important because people in the audience might have heard about architectures like retrieval augmented generation. They may have heard about agentic AI. They might have heard about model context protocol. They might have had to do data labeling for fine tuning. So all this requires some sort of structured input, some sort, a collection of labels, a set of URIs to make the meaning of those labels unique, a set of terms that you want to meaningfully and unambiguously describe in your MCP server for your data set. So maybe a background description of some terms that are relevant for your domain in which AI is being used to provide some type of explanation to people so that they make sense of that prediction or that suggestion. Having machine readable, let's just call it summaries if metadata sounds too technical, of the data to complement what we already have either in our data stores or in an alternative representation as embeddings or whatever in a machine learning model can only help, because at the end of the day, lots of the AI use cases can benefit from generation, so from generating new output, but lots of them will serve the same sort of informational needs that traditionally data platforms have been built up to do, where accuracy is important. So that type of grounding through metadata, knowledge graphs, ontologies will be very much facilitated by that.
Thanks, Helena. So it sounds to me like there's a lot of kind of a strong requirement for kind of strong collaboration between those from the technical side and those with the kind of real experience of working on the ground in these topics, as well as collaboration between the private sector, local authorities, and civil society. So Preet, I wanted to come to you and hear a little bit about the importance of collaboration in making data AI ready for local authorities.
Yeah, that for local authorities, the collaboration is extremely crucial because oftentimes, if the local authority is not the largest one, they might not even have sufficient amount of data to do some training on their own. So they, even for those, for that purpose, they need to collaborate with other local authorities or with central government to obtain some sort of this sort of data. And nowadays, what I'm seeing is kind of the emerging need to collaborate even between different governments on the same front. Because if we think about what's happening currently in Estonia in terms of cybersecurity or in Ukraine, then these countries are obtaining a large amount of data that is somewhat unique to these environments. And I think the same happens in all different countries and local authorities. They have different environments and different situations where they're in, and because of that, they are collecting a unique set of data. So if they want to build something that is very diverse or equitable to all and different types of individuals, they need to collaborate to obtain that diverse and equitable data set that they can use for building their AI solutions. One of the things that maybe I can bring from the Estonian experience is that Estonia is known to be very digitalized, but all of this digitalization happened without really high-level data taxonomies and ontologies being in place. We focused initially on data interoperability first and exchanging of data, and then kind of the building of these taxonomies came a bit later, and then was kind of added on top of that. But I feel that many authorities, especially local authorities who don't have a very high maturity in terms of digitalization, have the opportunity to do this other way around, to focus on their data quality, data taxonomy, and figure out what data they have in their environment, and then start building proper digitalization solutions on top of that. And this definitely gives them certain advantage, especially in the age of AI, that, as mentioned before, requires this sort of metadata to be present for high-performing automation.
Thanks, Preet. That's really interesting. So we've got a bunch of questions rolling in from the audience. I think we've got time for me to ask one more, and then we're going to pivot towards questions that are coming in. But just a reminder to add any questions that you might have for the panel into the Q&A. So last one I wanted to ask Martina. We talked a lot about AI and what's required to make this work, and I think for many people, members of the public, there's a lot of discussion about AI without really understanding what's the outcome. You know, it feels a little bit far away sometimes. So from where you're working in London, can you tell us a bit about where you see the benefits are? How is this going to change people's day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I mean, I gave some examples earlier that I think are quite interesting, and of course they were quite interesting from behind the scenes. Some of the use cases that we're already seeing is a really one that a lot of London boroughs are exploring, is using AI to transcribe meetings, for example, in social care or in children's services, where really what you want the social worker to do is talk to the person who needs their help, not spend a lot of time writing the notes. And so there are tools that allow you to do that really quickly. We're trialing similar things in kind of committee meetings and to allow Londoners to see the notes of those minutes quicker. So the kind of transparency and governance is more democratized for people. There are really practical use cases around transport management and curbside. So what that essentially means is things like automatically detecting ULEZ compliance, right? So that people don't sort of break the rules. So all these kind of quite practical things. What I do know is that I think most Londoners are going to interact with AI way more in ways that the public sector has nothing to do with, right? They are going to spend a lot of time using AI tools for their day-to-day. Things like Siri have been around for years and everybody talks to their phone now. But actually the thing we are more concerned about is what is the role of government and local government in helping prepare people for a change in the world, not really a change in how we deliver our services. So what skills do people need to understand what they're seeing is a deep fake? What do people need to know about the law to make sure that they are not using ChatGPT in ways that they breach GDPR or these kinds of things? And do we have a role in doing that? And I think we're very actively thinking about it because it's really changing London's economy. And we want every Londoner to be able to make the most of that and be ready for that. And so I saw a few people in the chat who are doing apprenticeships on AI. That's fantastic. That's the kind of thing we are thinking about as well. So practically, yes, there are some places where your public services might change a little bit, but actually practically the way you're going to see this is much more in your day-to-day, and we are trying to help you make use of that.
So very much not just AI ready data, but AI ready people as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Martina. So we've had a bunch of questions from the audience, so I'm just going to pick out a couple and share them with the panelists. So how would you handle local authorities wanting to use AI but hesitating? Oh, Preet, did you want to jump in before we get to the audience questions? Or did you? Is it a
No,
mistake
no,
you
I had
had?
I think you're reading the question I want to answer. So finish it.
Okay, okay.
I'll just jump in there.
Okay. So how would we handle local authorities wanting to use AI but hesitating because of their climate and sustainability goals? It's an image problem that's been brought up in discussions with lots of local authorities, and people don't want to be seen to be breaking promises. So Preet, what do you think?
That is definitely a difficult one, but I think it comes down to understanding what is the value that the individual solution creates, so we can adequately compare the value created and the cost of these services, not only financial, but also other types of costs, so kind of emissions and the cost of energy that is being consumed because of that. It is difficult to identify the value, to actually understand the primary value and all the kind of colliding value that comes from a solution building. But it is still a necessary step, I think, for every solution to understand if the results have been achieved, if we are now to be maintain a system that nobody really needs or uses, then we can make decisions on the life cycle of those systems based on that information as well. So it's a very crucial step to be done.
Elena, did you want to
Hey,
follow up as well?
just to add to that, totally agree that it's very it's quite a complex area. I think it's worth noting that we don't have reliable data or in fact established methodologies for this. Um, Obviously, the models that have been released in the last 3 years don't have the best environmental footprint. They haven't been built with those types of considerations in mind. They are nevertheless amazing achievements. And the environmental cost of using those models of inference is very different from what was already spent. It is an emerging area, and what I think we would need to, what I would like to see personally as an AI scientist is a broad, honest conversation about the environmental aspects and impact of AI, aligned with similar conversations that would need to happen or that we're already having about climate change and related challenges more broadly. What I wouldn't want to see is us collectively making the same mistakes to see the same polarization and politicization of a topic like climate change applied to AI as well. So whatever we have done to have those honest conversations about what's needed, about the targets, about the way we're assessing data, where we're making investments and so on, has led to, in some countries, significant shares of the population considering climate change as being fake news and a conspiracy of some parts of the ecosystem to achieve their aims. We should not make the same mistakes with AI because it is an important problem, but it is also complex when we don't have lots of data.
Agreed. Much work still to be done in that space. And so, kind of follow-up question we just had. Is it best that local authorities don't use AI until there's more clarity and information about the environmental impact? Martina, I don't know if you wanted to share what your thinking is on the ground on this question.
I'm really glad that people are starting to proactively bring this up because it's a definitely a really important discussion to have, and I agree with some of the question askers who've said even politically we want to make sure that we're not making choices that are directly contradictory to our choices elsewhere. I don't think that means we should stop. I don't think it means that all use cases are necessarily kind of going to shoot ourselves in the foot in future, but I do think it means that we need to be absolutely laser focused on the impact, and we need to be able to show that here are the choices we made and here's why. There are really kind of national discussions happening about things like data centers, and I think that at the moment, because we don't have a crystal clear sort of number to put on these things, it is a political discussion that sort of is a balance of risks. Yeah, so we have stayed in the realm of, if there's a really good use case and we know we can do it, we should try it. But I would be very interested to hear how other people are making these decisions because, yeah, information is incomplete at the moment.
Sounds like we need another webinar on the topic. We'll add that one to the backlog. So coming to another question now, all the way
Sorry,
from...
maybe just worth mentioning, just because it's maybe interesting for people here because they probably don't know how the internal machinations work. The Data for London program as a sort of mayoral priority sits directly alongside the infrastructure programs and the digital connectivity programs. So these discussions, we are very much having them, partially because data is infrastructure, right? Having good data enables other things. And so we are working in very similar ways, but also because we know that electricity demand generated by me is going to affect other people. So actually the way that we're working is reflecting these questions. Doesn't mean the information is complete, but to give people a sense of the public sector knows that this will come up. Sorry, Joe, I thought that might be interesting.
That's really interesting, and I did not know that, so thank you for sharing. So the next question is coming all the way from Canada and is kind of going back to open data sets. So we know that they can be downloaded by anyone and then manipulated to suit a particular false narrative and republished under a potentially authoritative barrier. So that's a risk facing someone on this call. That's a data publisher who wants to publish data to meaningfully, positively impact people. How can we make sure that data that we publish is used in these ways? What can we be looking at that can support people to kind of potentially limit some of the uses of data? I'm going to throw that to Eleanor.
There's a lot of legit reasons to be concerned. What I would say is that lying with statistics has been a common occurrence for decades. And any data set that is openly available on a government portal can be used in a number of ways, right? Say there's this distinction between facts and truth. All those data sets can be constructed and visualized to support a number of narratives. I don't think that much has changed from that point of view. There's a question about how the technologies are used and whether data that is once ingested in a machine learning model can be easily unlearned, and that's not the case. So that somewhat changes the conversation. But for me, fundamentally, those risks have always been there.
This is possibly one again where we're talking about AI ready people rather than AI ready data. A few years ago, we had a situation where a deep fake of the mayor started circulating and caused quite a lot of kind of public consternation, because what he was supposedly saying was quite offensive and people got very offended by it. But it was all fake, and I felt like that was quite early on when the deep fake started to be believable, and we're only going further with that. So yeah, this is one of those. I would put this in my bracket of how do we prepare Londoners for this. It's also part of why we're evolving the London Data Store into the Data for London program, where we're saying the London Data Store felt like that authoritative place where if the data is here, we believe it is valid, it's been sort of verified through a code of practice. That meant we had to limit the number of organizations who were able to contribute, because we had to limit the number of organizations we could verify. Actually, in a world where local authorities always work with partners, where the kind of ecosystem we work within is so diffuse and is a network, we can't verify every data set that we are working with. And so the metadata becomes critical. We need to be able to check collection approach, sampling approach, time series, all these kinds of things. But also we can no longer just take a copy of, we need to index their metadata without being expected that is also a stamp of approval of we will therefore vouch for the validity of this. And getting that balance right means that we are now essentially focusing on data discovery rather than kind of validation and standards.
Yeah, I think it is interesting how trust works differently when we talk about software, when we talk about data, or when we talk about AI models. So for software, if it's open source, you can read the code. It inherently builds trust when you have high levels of transparency. With AI models, it is essentially impossible to gain the same level of transparency if you take somebody else's model, because once you already have a trained model, it is not possible to see what was put inside there. Even if it's a open source model and the author says that this is the data it was trained on, you have to have trust towards that author to actually know that there wasn't any data poisoning attacks taking place, or any additional data wasn't put inside of those models. So in the AI model space, I think there's even more trust in private enterprises that sell you a model or sell you a service to use a model, because in that context you at least have a contractual agreement that your trust can be based on. The next and a bit more expensive step is definitely to have your own data and train your own model. So you have everything under your own control. You don't give away the control over data or the prompts that go into that or the model. But that's definitely the most complex and more expensive route than just starting to use somebody else's model out there. And for the data, it works the same way. You can see the data, and you have to trust the author to say that it is legit and it is accurate data and collected with high quality, and you can rely on it.
Thanks, Preet. And Eleanor, you wanted to
Yeah,
come in on this, but I wanted to add.
briefly. Yeah, just very briefly. I I keep on saying to whomever wants to listen that AI is not something that is happening upon us. It is not. It is something that it is a decision that people and organizations make, and there's various ways to influence practices around AI. One of the areas that DODI has been quite vocal about is around responsible data practices and transparency around data. And of course, there's a question of whether you trust those records and whether you trust the organizations that are auditing certain aspects of an AI product or service that are still very much in flux and emerging. But having more transparency and having emerging codes of conduct, just like we were discussing earlier. So people expect products to be created in an environmentally conscious, mindful way. Yeah, we should expect AI products as well to follow certain codes of conduct. And that relates to data. It also relates to things that we have talked about at the ODI for many years, like the workers that are involved in the data supply chain for AI and so on and so forth. So things that we wouldn't accept in any other areas after decades and decades and decades of advocacy. I hope to see the same types of cultural norms emerging as well. Not just when it comes to procurement of AI tools in the public sector, but more broadly as well.
Thanks, Eleanor. So we have another question here. We thought I hope you didn't think we were going to get away without a question on regulation. So we have one here on GDPR and whether GDPR has potentially sometimes limited the ability of local authorities to share data for publicly beneficial reasons. So for kind of true transparency and accountability reasons, GDPR is maybe limited sometimes what the ability for organizations to share. Is that an issue? Is it causing problems, or are there bigger fish to fry in this world? Preet or Martina, go ahead.
Yeah, I can take part of that. I think there's also in some areas of the world, local authorities as well as bigger governmental central authorities hide behind GDPR to avoid data exchange within government as well. And I think this is kind of a trap nobody should get into. It is definitely okay within a government to exchange data, and that there shouldn't be any GDPR obstacles to do that. For two government agencies to exchange data that is necessary for providing services for citizens, because they are both serving the same government, right? But for the other half, if there's an lack of open data sharing because of GDPR, that is definitely a problem, and I think it's an increasing problem because nowadays we see more and more opportunities to kind of reverse engineer the identities of individuals based on a very sparse set of data that's out there. So it may seem as it is not personally identifiable data, but when we put together 2, 3, or more data sets, then we might get that identification out there. And even when we utilize AI tools, this becomes a problem. So this is definitely a threat that should be analyzed carefully to make sure that the data that is shared is not revealing too much information about the identities of individuals.
Thanks, Preet. And Martina, you've got 2 minutes, so quickly
So
wrap up.
practically for us, in the UK, local government, because we deliver a lot of frontline services, actually do have kind of more legal pathways for using data, even where it is sensitive about people. That said, it is really important we maintain the trust of our residents. So actually, even though in theory we can do more than central government can, the local authorities that we work with and we share data with are extremely aware of their responsibilities to their residents and are extremely aware of, exactly as Preet says, some of the risks that, the unknown unknowns of what might happen in future, which is why the London Office for Technology and Innovation has set up the Information Governance Group for London, bringing together all the data protection officers and relevant information governance specialists, and has spent the past few years building up trust of a shared purpose and shared sort of understanding of the impact we're hoping to achieve. And every project starts with the why for the resident. And actually starting with the why from the resident almost automatically leads you to the legal gateway that lets you do it. And so starting there really helps and builds that trust among the organizations. Now, it's really important that infrastructure supports that, because of course the initial agreement can be written in a perfectly beautiful way, and then in practice there are leaks, there are cyber attacks, there are incidents that we need to still guard against, because even if, for all the good intentions in the world, if we can't then keep the data safe and deliver on that value that Londoners expect us to, we lose the trust anyway, and trust is easier lost than gained. So I would really invite anyone who is kind of concerned about these things to bring those concerns to London Data Week as well. This is precisely what the conversations are that we want to have with residents, we want to have with stakeholders. But yeah, that's been very much our approach, and we have found that starting there means that GDPR often is a excellent kind of safeguard and allows us to be confident in what we're doing.
Thank you, Martina. And unfortunately, we've run out of time for any more questions. But I want to say a big thank you to all of the panelists, Martina, Preet, and Eleanor. That was absolutely fascinating discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And thank you, of course, to the audience for your questions. So hopefully on the screen now, we're going to see an overview of our data-centric AI program, which has been running for about over a year now. On the right-hand side, you'll see the framework for AI-ready data, which Eleanor mentioned earlier in the panel. And you can read more about it on the ODI website by scanning the QR code or following the link at the bottom of the page. AI readiness is going to be a core component of lots of work that we're doing in and around local authorities over the next couple of months. And so this is just kind of the first public-facing component of our work with Nortal and local authorities. And this is a real opportunity for those who work at local authorities to share their perspectives with us and with the wider team. So if you're interested in this work and in this webinar, please do feel free to get in touch with us, research@theodi.org. We'd love to hear more from your perspectives and hope to be in touch soon. So once again, a big thank you to all the panelists today, and we hope to see everyone again soon.
And thank you, Joe, for moderating. Thank you.
Thanks all.